Hello, everybody, and welcome to This is Surveying. This week's episode, I'm pleased to have on the show is Sarah Tanner. Now, Sarah Tanner is a party wall surveyor and is also an associate director of Stanley and Strong, which is a reputable firm of party wall surveyors. So welcome, Sarah. I'm really
Hello.
pleased to have you on today.
I'm really excited to be here.
Because party wall surveying is one of those areas that I personally would like to understand more about. And I know a lot of people, potential surveyors, the public and other people, it would be good to get, insights into party wall surveying, both from your experiences. But before we go down that line, I know you've got a really interesting backstory to how you've become a party wall surveyor.
Yes.
So it'd be really good to sort of get a little bit of a background on yourself and sort of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so mine's probably a bit of an unusual one, and maybe one that's has been frowned upon. I think that where I am now is kind of evidence that you don't have to come from a surveying background, or you don't have to have spent years in the university, dare I say, to get into a position. My background, obviously I was born in South Africa. I actually moved to the UK about 21, coming up 22 years ago. So lived here longer than I did back there. And my professional what I started doing when I came to the country was I was in insurance and savings and customer service and that type of thing. So more in a financial background. At some point, my husband and I decided to pack our jobs in and go traveling. We ended up running pubs in and around London. Eventually had a child and took extended maternity. I ended up opening my own business. I love the creatives of crocheting and knitting and sewing, and I designed baby products. And I essentially opened up my own business selling things
quite
online.
Entrepreneurial then, really, Sarah.
Yeah,
it's quite
I guess
entrepreneurial, isn't it? Creative.
And yeah, it just helped me. Obviously, having a small child, it was a bit of an outlet as well, and obviously just to bring in some extra money for the household. At some stage, though, I decided I was probably going a bit crazy, wanting to get back out into the working world. I'm quite a social person, so working by myself didn't really work. I was kind of craving that, being back in the environment of probably adult conversation. And I was lucky enough to meet a current colleague at a business networking event for working mums, where I was kind of promoting my little business. Met her, and she had just got a job working for Jean-Pierre, my boss, who is a party wall surveyor. And so I took on the role of his PA, and that was 11 years ago. And 11 years ago, PA came into this weird and wonderful world of party wall surveying, which I had absolutely never, ever heard of before, because, unless you're doing building works or something like that,
right.
it's not something
one of
you
those
really
things
hear of.
You don't. No, you don't. You're right.
So long story short, I very quickly realized that I was very interested in the technical side of things. I was interested in the legislation of the Party Wall Act and the plans, reading all the plans, the architect's plans, engineers' plans, the actual elements of the buildings. And I was very lucky that Jean-Pierre recognized that as well and was keen for me to essentially learn and grow into the position of an assistant surveyor. I did a certificate in building surveying practice through the RICS. I've also I went on the courses that the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors offer. I became a member of the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors, and essentially, over the last 11 years, I've sort of grown through Jean-Pierre being a mentor, teaching me, everything that I know, to my current role now in the firm as associate director. So I'm very proud of that, and
you should be. I love these kind of backstories.
I am very lucky to have had Jean-Pierre, because I think it's, very important that he was on board with what I wanted to do. So, I definitely say to anyone who ends up in a similar situation that, go and seek out and make it known that you want to grow in the role, because I definitely know that if you don't ask, you don't get. So you should definitely.
Okay. So tip. Right. I think it's really good that you've got a a really strong mentor in Jean-Pierre, because I think it's one of those things you cannot underestimate the value of having that. It's all
Yeah.
very well doing the courses and this kind of thing, but having someone that encourages you, supports you to, like you say, progress is priceless. But for everybody listening, ask clearly is the
Yes.
tip.
Just ask, because not everyone's going to read your mind, or, these opportunities, they generally will come up most of the time when you have to make the opportunities for yourself. I mean, obviously, in some senses, I always say I was like, just sort of like landed by luck, or I was just blessed to land in this role in the first place. But certainly I could have just stayed as PA if I wanted, and coasted through there. But you have to sort of go out there and make it known that that's what you want to do. And there have been challenges along the way, having a young family, the bit of a balancing act. We have obviously had the pandemic in between, where it's like working from home, which I
Yes.
think everyone found that challenging. But party wall surveying still continued. So lucky for us.
So what I'd like to move on to now is sort of to understand a bit more about party wall.
Yeah.
What is it about? Why does it come up, and when do people need it?
As I said before, it's not something that anyone would really know about. When people ask me what I do for a job, I quite often get this big question mark over their head, like, what? Never heard of that before.
That's like most surveyors anyway. Definitely party wall.
We put the party in surveying. Oh, do it.
Oh, that's a good one.
I've heard that said to me before. No, so essentially it's a legal process. It's actually a statutory process. So there is a legal requirement to do this. And if you bypass it, it's not a good thing to do. So generally when people are proposing to do building works to their properties, whether it's being extended, sometimes even for a brand new development on a vacant plot of land, or demolishing and rebuilding, there's certain sections of the Act or certain elements of that bill that have that could possibly trigger the Party Wall Act to be applied.
Okay.
So generally speaking, a lot of people think that it will only apply to you when you share a party wall, or two buildings are built off of one wall.
I must admit that used to be my perception too.
It also relates to building new walls on boundaries, and also excavating within 3 meters of a neighbour's property or structures on their lands, whether that be a boundary wall, or whether that be their actual house, whether it be the foundations for a outbuilding. So there's those three main headings, one being structural changes to a party wall. So that's the one that most people think that it relates to, but actually you've got those extra elements. So quite often, if you're doing a loft conversion and you're attached to another property, it would apply. If you're doing a rear extension and you're building up to the boundary, even if you're detached, that, it would apply.
How does it get to, so how does it get triggered, as in, who sort of, like, I'm imagining myself, I do some work on my house. How do I know?
That's the question. Because in the Party Wall Act, there's no rule that says who needs to, not necessarily like who needs to tell you, but the Act is specific in that it's the building owner's responsibility. So the way that we refer to people is a building owner, who is the person doing the work, and the adjoining owner, which is the neighbouring property or the person that's next to the work. And it's the person doing the work, it's their responsibility. And I guess if you think about it, if someone's going to be taking on a renovation of some sort or an extension, there's a lot of boxes that they're going to have to tick. So you have to make sure you've got your planning permission. You've got to make sure that you're going to get building regulations. There's a lot of different things. So some people might get told by
I'm
their
going to say,
architect.
is it these other, like the architect?
Yeah,
this is what I was thinking.
sometimes the architect will tell them. Other times it might be someone in the planning department. But at the end of the day, it's up to that individual to research what is required. So we do get people coming to us saying, we've started our work and the neighbours come and said, you didn't serve me with a party wall notice and I didn't know. So so I would definitely say, for anyone that's going to be carrying out any type of building work, especially if you're on a semi-detached or terraced property, even if you're detached, just contact a party wall surveyor. very, very happy. People send us their plans all the time, and we will go back to them and say, nope, you're really lucky. You don't need to serve a notice, or actually, yes, it's triggered in relation to this property. So we will let people know exactly who they need to serve the notices on. It's really important to make sure, because recent case law, there's always party wall jobs that sometimes will go through to the courts and be tested. And one of the ones that have recently come to fruition is that if you don't serve a party wall notice, then you cannot apply the Party Wall Act. And the Party Wall Act, whilst a lot of people think it's just, a pain and it's going to be fees and it's going to prolong the amount of time until I get to do my work, the reason it's there is to keep disputes out of the courts, because a lot easier for us as party wall surveyors to deal with it under the confines and the boundaries of the Act, because there's set limitations to how we actually administer the Act as party wall surveyors. When it goes, if you haven't served a party wall notice and you can't therefore apply everything to the Act, then if there's issues like damage or other issues that arise, you have to rely on common law, which is like how long is a piece of string.
So then it gets more messy and more expensive maybe. What is the cost of a notice or?
So to serve a party wall notice to one neighbour, I mean, our fee is 125 plus VAT. So for £125 plus VAT, you can know that you've kind of satisfied your responsibility as a building owner to serve a notice on your neighbour. If your neighbour says, that's fine, go ahead and do it, they tick the consent box and sign it, and that's job done for now.
That's it.
If you then have issues later on, because you've served that notice, you can come back to the party wall surveyors, whether it be us or anyone else. And if you find yourself in a dispute over an element of works that falls under the Act, then you can appoint those surveyors to help you settle it. And it's that element that is a lot easier and cheaper than going common law route, because again, we've got the confines of the Act and we know what's permissible, what's not, and how to settle those disputes.
So if they don't consent, what happens?
Yeah, so you serve the notice, you say, I'm building a rear extension, the neighbours, essentially, they can consent or dissent. And there's a misconception that a dissent from a neighbour means that they want or they can stop the works from taking place. If I could rewrite the Act, I'll probably change that word completely, to be honest, along with a few other things. But it's very different. So in planning, mission is a totally separate process to us. But with planning, a neighbour actually can submit an objection to the size of that development or the position or the height of the placement of windows, all those types of things. And that can actually have an effect on whether or not that development will get planning. Our process is that if you dissent to a notice, it essentially means that the neighbours, and what will happen is the neighbours will dissent and appoint a party wall surveyor. And the party wall surveyor will the neighbour can have the same surveyor as the person doing the work, the building owner.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Which we have to be impartial. So it doesn't matter who's appointing us. So perhaps I don't want to put words in with solicitors, but the way I kind of, people often think we're a solicitor and that if they appoint us, we're just going to do what they want and we're going to back their corner, we're going to fight their corner. When actually, when we're appointed, we are completely impartial to the person we have to be impartial. So looking at the buildings, and what I like to say is actually, people say, well, who's your client? And there's no client relationship. Even though the person doing the work has to pay the fees, but there's no sort of client relationship because it's a statutory appointment. So people don't really realize that when they appoint a surveyor, they can't fire them. We can't. When they appoint a party wall surveyor, you can't fire us because we're not doing what you want us to do. But what we have to do is we have to actually look. What I tend to say is, if you really want to understand, is that the party wall is our client, and we are looking at one building and another building. We're looking at what is proposed, and what we have to ensure is that the building owner doing the works gets to exercise their right to build their development, whilst at the same time not preventing or joining neighbour from doing
I
something similar in the
see.
future. And also we have to look at the manner and the method and the way in which the works take place, so there's a minimal risk of damage, or to lessen the risk of damage. So when someone is dissenting, the whole process, it's actually an enabling process. It just depends on if you're going to go from here to here, or if you're going to go from here and here and here and still end up there, because that's generally the process of when a surveyor is appointed. We have to review what's going to happen and then eventually authorize the works to go ahead, subject to, and we can put it, it's like a legal document called a party wall award. That document sets out what works can take place, what happens if there's damage, what's everyone's roles and responsibilities. And then once that's served, they can go ahead and do the work. So the consent and the dissent essentially it's not I want to stop the works, or that I can stop the works, or you can go ahead. It just means, is there further involvement of a party wall surveyor? Or if someone consents, the owners generally will liaise with each other about damage, access, all those types of things. So
This is
those
really
are the two
interesting, Sarah.
different things.
I didn't know that part about the client. Didn't know that.
When you think about it, so obviously if someone has their planning permission and they go through the party wall process, at the end of the day, they have to be able to get to a point where they're going to do their work. They might have to change one or two details. If we had to see that there was a trespass, a gutter overhanging onto the neighbour's land, we can ask for updates to the plans, but only to the extent that it's going to satisfy the Party Wall Act. But mostly, planning takes prevalence over what's going to be built. So sometimes people think, well, even if someone's got planning, that they can use the party wall process to obstruct them doing their work, when actually you can make it cost more money by appointing your own surveyor. But at the end of the day, the surveyors are generally having to work together. If you've got two surveyors, one on each side, you're actually working together to agree a document. A lot of party wall surveyors probably wouldn't agree with me, because there are some that they still think it's a you against me thing. But for me, I'm always saying, we've got to work together, because this person's going to do the work eventually. Why are we going to make it more difficult to get to that point?
I have heard about this before, actually. This kind of not always working together. And I think we touched upon before we started was around fees, and it's something I've heard of also in the past, is regards to the charging of fees. Can you talk a bit more about that, how that works, and what the issues are out there that you tend to see?
I mean, this is something that I feel quite strongly about, and I'm definitely not shy to make my opinions known, and I'm pretty certain that a lot of party wall surveyors that have worked with me before will back that up. Feel strongly that party walls, there's a lot. Unfortunately, there's always going to be, in all industries, there's going to be some people that maybe will try to use the process in a way to gain more fees. And for me, I just don't accept it. I've got very strict standard and morals when it comes to that. And I strongly feel that party wall surveyors should only charge for the work that they are actually doing. And I feel
who pays who? How does that work?
So the person who is carrying out the works, the building owner, is responsible for the surveyor's fees. But it says, it's very clear that it's the reasonable surveyor's fees. They have to be reasonable. And we see a lot of this, fees at this level for potentially an area that's not as affluent. But then when dealing with a property in Chelsea and Westminster, the fees are all of a sudden shooting up.
So they're inflated for the area.
The postcode lottery, So generally, I feel that timesheets that I see, not all the time. I mean, unfortunately, you are always just going to get those certain surveyors that will try this. But for me personally, I just don't accept it, and I do fight back on the fees, because I feel strongly that we should only put forward our fees based on the work that we're actually given. Nowadays, hourly rates, they increase, obviously, but someone charging a really high hourly rate, in theory, should spend less time, because if you're going to be charging a high hourly rate, you're obviously going to be more experienced. It's going to take you quicker time to deal with something than, say, a newly, assistant surveyor or something like that are going to take a bit longer. Their fees are less. But generally speaking, I see timesheets come through where we spoke about this earlier, which surveyors are trying to tell me it took them an hour to review some existing and proposed plans in on the way to or before attending a site visit. And I just laugh because if I had to stare an existing and proposed loft conversion or ground floor extension set of plans for an hour, I'll probably be asleep. I just don't buy it. And so surveyors, they chance their luck and they sometimes believe it themselves. But I have got a bit of a reputation now that I just don't accept it. And I just don't think that it's right to charge these people who are, yes, they might have money because they are doing a development, but it costs a lot of money to do these developments nowadays. So why should we be then adding to the burden of the cost exposure? We should just be charging for the work that we've been done.
What's fair?
What's
and it's
fair
interesting
and what's reasonable.
because this to me it's like when I compare it to other areas of surveying, where you're public facing and you literally your fees, for example, in residential, there's very much a race to the bottom in fees because people like literally are fighting over price. However, so that then puts the price down. But in your situation, it's a legal requirement. It's like has to happen. It's not like I can negotiate on that price. So the actual person it impacts doesn't have the influence over that, because they're not going out and shopping around for a party wall surveyor, are they?
No. Well, the thing is, they do shop around. We do get people that come in for quotes for us. But the other thing that I find, and it's controversial, but we're a relatively smaller firm compared to some. You get these bigger firms that are the city centre firms that are dealing with these really huge commercial developments. Yes, they have to do party wall matters, but I don't see how or why these bigger firms, they take on jobs for a tiny loft conversion in Twickenham, say for instance, but then as an adjoining owner surveyor, but then they're trying to charge the same fees as what they're charging for these huge commercial developments, million pound developments, and saying that they've spent 2 or 3 hours reviewing a RICS standard draft party wall award for a loft conversion and essentially charging double than what, we or other smaller firms. So I just, I do think that, if someone wants to appoint them, that's fine, but it has to be just, for me, a reasonable fee.
It has to be fair.
We all work from generally the same drafts. As I say, the RICS, the Faculty of Party Wall Surveyors, they've got all these standard documents. For the most part, those never change for different party wall awards. And obviously the awards have to be amended applicable to the actual work. So we will obviously have to include or take away certain clauses of this document that aren't relevant anymore. But to an extent, you're working from the same base.
Is it because that word reasonable is so open to interpretation? It's quite vague.
I did say there was a few things in the Act I would rewrite if I could.
It's it's licensed to print money, isn't it, by the sounds of it? What is reasonable?
Well, the thing is, the way we kind of see it is that you'll know, bearing in mind a party wall award fee, it's not just the drafting of that document, the fee that, will come into place for us anyway. It will be, the final fee would include the notice, a site visit to record the schedule of conditions survey, which we always recommend gets done. That's when you have a survey done of the neighbour's house to record the current condition before you start your works. Because it works both ways, because you want to know what their house looked like.
Because so they can't come and claim of damage, but damage was already there. Okay.
Obviously, as surveyors, we would probably, be able to sort of tell if a crack was newer or older and that type of thing. But it's always good to just have that first picture. So we always recommend that gets done. But it works obviously for the neighbour as well, that they can prove, look, there was nothing on my wall. You've put a padstone in, now there's cracks. So it can work both ways.
Right.
So the fee will be generally the notice, schedule of condition and the party wall award. That's what it encompasses. So we know when we've dealt with a job, we'll know the ease at which it was, or if there was an issue, or if there was a design issue and that potentially that caused some extra time. So by the time you get to the end of the agreement of that award, that's when the fees are agreed. It's the last thing that's agreed.
Because
so by
then
that
you
time,
can those fees are reasonable.
Yes, reasonable. And we can ask for timesheets and things like that. And it's obviously that then when I start, we try not to pick too much, but I think I mentioned earlier that a lot of people don't realize either. There's all these different little gems that are written into the Act. There are some gems. But when 2 surveyors are appointed, the first thing they have to do is they have to go and appoint a 3rd surveyor, which is to complete so that the surveyors have a tribunal. And quite often that 3rd surveyor doesn't even know that they've been selected or as part of the job. And it kind of just sits dormant. We'll notify the owners who's been selected because they can actually go to that person as well. But if you find yourself in a dispute with your peer, your party wall surveyor, whether it's about something to include in the award or the more often it's about fees, I find, then that surveyor can actually step in and say, well, actually, no, I make this determination. So there's all these little things. So quite often I don't let it get to that point because I'll just be like, no, I don't see how it's possible that
gets messy, doesn't it?
Yeah. But at the end of the day,
and it comes back to one of the things I spot a lot is the way things are structured or the way things work. It does discourage the cooperation or collaboration between surveyors.
yeah.
And this is a really good example of where clearly there are some that do work together.
And like I say, this is just it's a minority because 90% of the time or 95% of the time, it's fine. We all really, or most of us, want to actually work together. We want to get through the working day. We don't want issues with each other. You've got to have a laugh. If you don't laugh, you cry. And that
you party, aren't you? Party wall surveyor. Put the party in, party wall, which I've got a quote
we
somewhere.
do have a bar.
I really
actually,
like that.
We've got some optics in the office. We have a bar Friday afternoons, although it never happens. We always intend it never happens.
Oh, I'm just still working.
Yeah, we do obviously want to work together, and I don't take delight in, it really is upsetting if you get into a situation where you're not agreeing with your fellow party wall surveyors. So for the most part, but unfortunately there are some that almost seem to delight in not getting along. But they're
Yes.
few. They're few.
Interesting. At least there's few and far between, which is always good to hear. So the next thing is around which we did discuss was obviously your journey coming into this and being a mom and progressing through as a woman, as a party wall surveyor. How has that been? What is it? How has it been your experience in the party wall surveying world?
I mean, I'd like to say for the most part, it's been fun. There have been some challenges. I've had quite, 1 or 2 shocking things said to me at certain stages. Am I late because I was ironing my husband's shirts, that kind of thing. From some, say, surveyors.
What was your comeback?
My
Sarah?
comeback was, no, I have people that do that for me.
Oh, superb.
It is changing. It can be difficult for people that have probably been in the industry for a very long time to accept change like that. But it is very refreshing to see more and more now other female surveyors.
Yeah.
I've been working with Jean-Pierre for 11 years. And I think when I started, I can probably name 2 or 3 female surveyors that I knew at the time. Whereas now, every day, you're dealing with female surveyors. So it's definitely come a long way. I do feel, and I kind of mentioned that it probably might be a bit controversial, that I've been to a few events and it's kind of, I feel it's getting to the point now, like, yes, we know that there are females, and yes, we want to have inclusivity and diversity, but that narrative or that topic I feel is just getting a little bit overdone. It's like being pushed too much. So I fear that if it just, like when someone's really trying to push something on you so much that you actually end up going the other way.
Or switching off as well. Oh, here we go.
And I have seen the eyes glaze over. And I don't think that that's because they're being rude or dismissive. I do actually just feel that narrative, yes, we're in surveying. Everyone knows we're here. We're doing really, really well. And I truly believe that you are going to, if you allow people to treat you a certain way, they will do that. So, and if you actually treat people the way you want to be treated. So I've got the same level of professionalism, kindness, the way I deal with people, I deal with everyone in the same way. If I don't deal with male surveyors differently to female surveyors, or, people from other backgrounds or cultural backgrounds. So if I'm dealing with everyone in the same way, then I'd like to think, and I expect that people will just do that to me. If we just carry on doing that, everyone's going to treat you the way you treat them. And yes, as I say, it is great. It's really nice now to go on site or, turn up for a schedule of condition and actually meet up with another female, and we'll have a good old chat and stuff. But generally now, all the surveyors that I meet, most of them are professional, and I don't feel now that I get treated very different.
Do you think it's gradually improved? Do you think it's improved over your time? There wasn't many.
No, definitely not. And as I said, there was a few, maybe surveyors that have been in the industry quite a long time that liked things to be done in a certain way, and things were very different in terms of back when I started. People were still printing or including a CD of photos into an award for the condition survey. I know. And then you had, I'm not that old. A floppy, no, to be fair, I think I even saw a floppy disk once or twice. So, but like from a processing point of view, when things started to change, even you had to print 3 copies of the award, then you had to post the 3 copies to the neighbouring surveyor. They would have to physically sign, keep one unsigned, signed one and send it back to you by snail mail. Then you had to post that to the person doing the work. So just the service of the award alone would be something like a 2 to 3 week process, depending on what Royal Mail was saying and depending on how quickly someone signed something. And so, but now we've got electronic service that people can, so a lot has changed in the actual day-to-day processing. So those older surveyors that you were used to, though, they've had a lot to deal with in terms of not only that, but then a shift of female surveyors, younger surveyors, all of that kind of thing. So there's been a big change since I've started, and that's only 11 years. So, for those that have been around since 1996 when that was when the new act was written, a lot has changed since then.
A lot has changed since then, a long time ago. Yeah. University.
Where was I?
Giving away my age.
I think I was starting high school.
University. So, I think that's really positive to hear, because it's one of those things, obviously I hear a lot about that whole subject across different types of surveying.
Yeah.
And I'm increasingly hearing this kind of thing, that there is this shift and improvement. And I think, I must have to agree with you on the way to approach it. And I think what's interesting is that the fact that you challenge it, you challenge the bad behavior there and then, I think is so important. And I think that's what many women probably don't, and I understand, don't feel comfortable doing. But I think challenging it, calling it out is you nip it in the bud early on.
Way.
Otherwise it goes away, you resent it, you hold it, you don't feel good about yourself. Nothing changes. But I think there are some big things that are happening and improvements are, but I think you're right. I think it's more, we need to sort of move the narrative now, I think.
Yes.
To more action than just talking about it. And
I totally
there's
agree.
good things happening.
I totally agree.
So one of the other things I would like to ask that I'm interested in is my understanding from speaking to other surveyors. I know some surveyors that have moved out of party wall, for example, because they found it is quite fraught. So it is a very emotional, it can be, people get very upset because it's their home, their livelihood. How do you sort of feel about that or deal with those kind of things? Because I think it takes a certain kind of person to be able to deal with that kind of really emotional, upset, angry people. And you're seeing, I can imagine the communications you must get. How do you sort of deal with that?
Every day is different, put it that way. Which is probably one of the things that I like about my job, is that every day is different. But certainly, I always say party wall surveying, a very small element is surveying. I always say, because the bigger element generally is being an agony aunt, arbitration. Things can change around so differently in a job when if you've people, as you said, are very sensitive. They're very highly emotional. They are, their home is their livelihood. It's their safe space. Imagine, not everyone's going to have that same level of how to deal with those emotions. So, some people are less adverse to risk, others are fine. So, and a lot of people just don't understand, because they don't understand that what the neighbor is doing is actually it's like so minor that there's almost like a 99% that there is no risk. But because there is a risk, that's what, the Act has highlighted, they need a notice. There could be certain things like a flashing into a wall. The risk of that is like, but they're like, and the way the wording is. And so we have to be mindful that not everyone understands the technical elements of it. And what I find is that just being able to just listen, give them a little bit of, show them that you are also human. There has to be a bit of a human touch to it, because you can't just go through this thing as a robotic. And I think a lot of surveyors, they do that. And where I find that things go a lot smoother when you actually take on board the concerns, then you can kind of weed out the ones that potentially aren't party wall. Maybe, give them some advice on, go to speak to someone else about that, or if it's a planning issue. But a lot of party wall surveying, and I think that's where people don't have the patience, or other party wall surveyors or surveyors don't have a patience for that, because if you can't give that, then a lot of the time the neighbors or the owners don't feel heard. They don't feel like they've been taken on board. They're, what they've said, been taken on board. And that's when things kick off, I find.
It's just come into my head now is something I remember being told a story. This was a genuine story about this a scenario where the property owner basically wanted to chop down this tree at the bottom of the garden that was overhanging, and they were also do some building works and things. And the neighbour was extremely upset, like really upset about it. And things kicked off. And then as time went on, it ended up being a case of the party wall surveyor was speaking with the neighbouring neighbour, and it turns out this tree she'd planted was for her son that she'd lost. So she'd lost a son. She planted that. And so to her was, to the other person, it was just a few branches. It was overhanging and all this. But to her, it was like, and then as soon as that understanding was then actually relayed to they got it as well.
Exactly.
But it went on for ages before they got to that bit. It wasn't obvious.
Yeah, and
I've just come to mind that one. I was like, it was quite sad, but it was also, and things were much better once, and they actually were brought together, and it was all resolved in the end. But
exactly, and from my perspective, I'd rather have the owners being in agreement with each other than in a full-blown war and dispute, because who wants to live next door to someone that you've had this big issue with? And so one of the things that we do, and we actually state in our quote, and I would probably put it in more these words, that if a neighbor if they get the party wall notice just delivered off the bat without any warning, the same as if they get planning application notification without having actually any warning, they're immediately going to have their backs up. Whereas what we say is go to your neighbor with your plans, show them in layman's terms, this is what I'm planning on doing. I want to make sure that I go through the correct procedures, and I'm going to get a party wall surveyor to ensure that all the paperwork is done correctly. And this is the name of the party wall surveyor. Then when that party wall notice drops, the neighbor's aware, and they obviously going to take to it better. And if they did really want to have a surveyor, they might be more inclined to have an agreed surveyor. So that'll be less fees and a little bit of a quicker process. Or they might even consent outright and agree to go, through things directly. But just going to the neighbor, maybe with a box of chocolates or a bottle of wine or something like that, goes a long way. Because
so communication, which is like
and
the fundamentals of everything.
That is, people say, no one's communicated with me. And we find that generally when things get really fraught, it's because there isn't communication, whether it's communication from the actual owner, communication from the party wall surveyor. They want to be they want that information. They want to have the communication. They want to know what's happening, and they want to feel like they know, what avenues.
It's almost they matter as well. It's like they're not just being given something. It's like
exactly,
like you say, heard.
Yeah, which you do find is maybe for a commercial developer, But even, working with developers, they also take the time to go around, knock on the door, chat to the neighbors, because you don't want to have issues during the build. You don't want to have issues during the party wall note process. You don't want to have issues during the planning process. And just going out and having a conversation with that person shows them that you actually note that they are there and they are actually a human being.
Yes.
And actually, there were, one of the events I went to recently, there was actually someone who stood up and did a talk on the, adding this sort of personal touch or this human element to these processes, because yes, it is a legal process, it's a statutory process, but if you're just going to go through it as bomb, ticking all the boxes, we're just doing this, then yes, obviously it's not going to be a nice experience for anyone, and you're going to have more likely have these arguments. And that, I'm not surprised that people do leave this practice, because there are obviously going to be some people you can try bend over backwards for them, they're still going to do, and
I can imagine.
and early on in the process, I will tell someone, we're just going to have to deal with them, maybe keep them at arm's length, which we have to, but other people you can, be a little bit more.
This is kind of ringing true, though, for every area of surveying, the surveyors that I've spoken to, it always comes back to so many things it comes back to communication, and it comes back to the human element, the people involved, like the need to relay a report in layman's terms, pick up the phone, speak to the client, because someone will read something and they'll panic. Or they're like, what is this? Or confused, or they don't understand. Whereas if they spend the time speaking to them, I see this a lot across surveying. And I think a lot of surveyors, of course, are exceptionally technical and have that expertise. But I think fundamental, just as important, is that need for communication skills, the emotional intelligence, because that's what I'm also hearing from what you're saying.
Definitely. Yes,
it's emotional intelligence, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And as you say, with us, there's a process of sending a draft document to another surveyor. They make comments on it and they send it back to us. And sometimes you'll see a comment on there and you're, what is this person talking about? Or why is he asking for this? Or, you can immediately, and then you'll pick up the phone and say, hey, can we chat about this? Or, or the fees, for instance, and quite often just having that, phone call just to run through a few things, and there's so much that you can actually just iron over without having to get into these full-blown disputes with your other surveyors. Just picking up the phone, having a conversation, getting a little bit of insight is, okay, why have you included that? What's the thought process on that? And we were like, oh, actually, you're right. Maybe I didn't think of that. So I definitely think that communication in this process between owners is, I said, I like the diversity and sense of the different types of people that we deal with. I'm dealing with not only other party wall surveyors, but architects, engineers, planning officers, to a small extent. We don't really get involved in that, but, the people that are, the properties, the building owners, the adjoining owners, interior designers, there's all these different, elements and all these different people that we have to deal with. So you have to be open-minded and you have to be able to sort of put yourself in other people's shoes as well. And just...
Yeah, absolutely. Put yourself in other people's shoes. I've learned a lot. Some of the things that you've shared, it's like some of it's just things I wasn't aware. Obviously, I'm not a party wall surveyor and things, but I think the members of the public or the surveyors be like, oh, I didn't realise that was the case. And those things that you've mentioned, especially like around the fees, is quite an interesting one, and it's quite an eye opener, really. Before we close up, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Anything else at all?
No, I mean, just as a general overview is just for, for people that are proposing doing building works, or if you're a neighbour of someone doing building works, there's no harm in, and I think everyone should really take it upon themselves to look into what is needed of them from a statutory or legal point of view, because you can't just rest on your laurels that someone's going to tell you whether it applies or not.
Where do they go, Sarah? Where could they go? Is there something online?
On the government website, it does give a lot of information about the Party Wall Act. But I mean, even if they wanted to, shameless plug, contact
Mhm.
us,
No, not shameless at all.
people send their plans to us all the time. And
Okay.
if we can tell them, yes, notice is due, no, there's no notice due, go ahead. And, so they'll send them to us. We've got a bit of information on our website as well. But generally, just that's what I would say, because it's really difficult to get into a situation where if you haven't served a notice, that you could end up having to rely on common law, which is like how long is a
Okay.
piece of string.
Mm.
So you kind of, it's better to always rather serve that notice and be able to rely on the Party Wall Act than to
Yes.
not. And also when it comes to selling your house, we often get calls from people that have done building works or were the neighbours, and the solicitors and the estate agents are asking for copies of Party Wall paperwork because they need to know that you've actually satisfied that, because we've seen sales fall through when people haven't done it. So it's a really, really important thing to do. And like I say, even if it's a case of, getting that initial notice, it's 125 plus VAT or thereabouts, depending on, and you can even draft your own one. Hopefully you do it correctly, because it is a little bit tricky and you've got to make sure you
It
cover all
sounds
the
tricky.
correct.
I wouldn't suggest that, everybody.
But some people try it, but I would just say, just make
Yeah.
sure that you get it covered. Rather be safe than sorry.
I think that's great. And I think that's great to close on as well. So I hope this has been helpful to everybody. It certainly has been interesting to me. So I'd
Oh,
like to
good.
thank you for your time today,
You're
Sarah.
welcome.
It's been really good.
Yeah, it's
Thank you
been
very much
great.
for being on
Thank you for
today.
having me. Thank you.
Thank you.